Thank you all for being here and for braving the weather. As Joel said, we'll try to keep it brief tonight. We got some important information to cover, and I really am trying to cover a lot of territory tonight and next Sunday night, Lord willing, concerning the qualifications of elders. But we will try to keep it brief so that we can get started for home before maybe the worst of the weather sets in. We thank you for braving the elements. As Joel mentioned, we think we have a lot of people watching on the live stream. Thanks for watching. And we hope we all will take into serious consideration the things that we'll be discussing about the qualifications of elders as we are in that process of trying to select some men who can serve in that capacity. Can you imagine if you had a flock of sheep? I mean, you're not just a hobby farmer. You have a big flock of sheep. It's your livelihood. You are a sheep man. You raise and sell sheep. It's your business. It's your livelihood. And so you have this very large herd or flock. I says it wouldn't be a herd, it'd be a flock. You have this very large flock of sheep, and you just turn them out. And you just let them go on their own, do their own thing. There's nobody watching over them. There's no shepherd. There's no one guarding or protecting them. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? It would be absolutely foolish to do that. You would not be very wise in that way. Well, do you think God would do that? Do you think it would be His desire to turn His flocks out and no one to oversee them, to guard them, to protect them, to feed them? Obviously not. And in God's plan, the shepherds for His flock are the elders over local congregations. And so we want to continue to study that tonight. We started our study last Sunday night. We want to continue tonight. Lord willing, we'll look tonight and then conclude next week looking at the qualifications of elders. First of all, when we talk about elders, let's just do this. I think there are some wrong attitudes that brethren sometimes have concerning men who might serve as elders. And one of those prevalent attitudes is that there's really no one who can ultimately qualify. Some people make the argument, no one can qualify, let me go back here. No one can qualify because maybe they're not inspired. Maybe the elders in the first century time frame were inspired. We don't have any inspired men today, therefore nobody could be qualified to be an elder today. That's a faulty argument. There's no indication that in first century times all who were elders were necessarily gifted with the miraculous measures of the Holy Spirit. There's just no indication of that, and it's not stated as a necessary qualification. That would be, we think, a faulty argument. I tell you though, and I don't hear that. I don't really hear people making that argument too much, but what we do hear is that there's no perfect men. And since there are no perfect men, then no one can ultimately qualify to be an elder. In practicality, that would obviously be impossible. If you have to be perfect to be an elder, that would be an impossibility. No one would be able to satisfy that. And so therefore, you would have no churches having elders. Unfortunately, though, when this attitude prevails that no one can qualify because no one is perfect, it results in churches that go on indefinitely without any elders to oversee. And if it was true that we'd had to have perfect men to be elders, we might as well quit talking about it because that's never going to happen. So one bad attitude is no one can qualify. Another attitude that is a wrong attitude is, well, we'll just have to go with the best that we have. All right, now if you're going to take that position, we're just going to go with the best that we have. Out of the ones that are available, we'll pick the best ones we have. How many of the qualifications do they have to have? So here's a guy, he's got half of the required qualifications, and that's sort of the best we've got. So we're going to make him and this other guy who has 45% of the qualifications. That's the best we've got, but we're going to go with that. Who's going to say we can overlook X number of qualifications? We're just going to have to go with the best that we have. That would be a faulty attitude as well. It's a wrong attitude, sometimes expressed that we'll just let men grow into the job. No, they need to be qualified when they're appointed to the job, right? And we're going to be talking about these qualifications in a minute, and all of them are present tense qualifications. It's not We hope he will be at some time apt to teach. He's not apt to teach right now, but we hope that he will grow into that and he will develop that skill. No, if he's not apt to teach right now, just picking out one qualification, then he's not qualified. We're not looking for men who will grow into the job. Some people have the idea that the qualifications are sort of flexible. Now, we understand that some of the qualifications are relative. For instance, that qualification to be apt to teach. That's a relative thing. You know, some men are more apt, that is, they have more aptitude or ability in teaching than others. All who would be elders must have some aptitude in teaching, but that would be somewhat relative. And then we might find men qualified, some more apt than others in teaching, just using that as an example. And so we understand that some of the qualifications are relative, but not all of them are. Some of them are absolute. And it certainly would not justify us just picking any and all men to be elders because we're viewing the qualifications as a totally flexible thing. And then another wrong attitude that some people have is that once a man is an elder, he can always be an elder. That's not true. First of all, if a man's not qualified, he should not be appointed. Secondly, if he becomes unqualified for whatever reason, he should step down or be removed from the office of elder. This is not a lifetime appointment. It is not true. Once an elder, always an attitude. So those are just some wrong attitudes we thought we would touch on. We could talk a lot more about each of those, I suspect, but for sake of time, just note that, unfortunately, brethren sometimes have these wrong kinds of attitudes toward the qualifications of elders. What are the qualifications then? Well, we start out with probably the simplest one, and that is that someone to be an elder must be a man. It seems like it's almost unnecessary to even mention that. However, we live in a day and time when there's been all kind of blurring of gender roles in our society. And so probably more now than maybe ever before, we have to stress an elder, an overseer, a bishop, a pastor must be a man. And in the text that Joseph read for us earlier from 1 Timothy 3, this is a true saying: if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop must be blameless, and so on it goes. In Titus chapter 1, these are the two texts, by the way, obviously, that we're going to stress continuously. 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1. In Titus chapter 1, verse 5, for this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I had appointed thee, if any be blameless. Now, look at those two statements. In Timothy, it says a man, but Titus says it could be anybody. So is it possible up here that the word man is being used in the generic sense? In other words, what must a man do to be saved? Well, you understand that to be the generic use of the word man, right? And that would apply to men and women both. So is it possible up here that Paul has in mind anybody, and just using the term man in the generic sense? In Titus, he said, if any be blameless. Maybe as men and maybe a woman could be an elder. No, that's not the case, because we know he's going to go on to describe that in both 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, that the man must be the husband of a wife. And so we know he's talking about the male gender there. It's not, the argument does not stand. Women cannot be elders. It must be a man. A second thing that we could comment about is desire. A man desires the office of bishop. If a man desires the office of a bishop, that of course is the expression here in 1 Timothy 3. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. Is that a qualification or not? I've heard people quibble over whether we should even include that in the list of qualifications. I'm not here to even delve into that argument, but it obviously is a necessary characteristic. A man must desire to do the will of God, that the will of God be carried out. if a guy doesn't care that the will of God be carried out in a local church, he's certainly not the guy we want as an elder. And so a man needs to have a certain desire to see God's will for the local work to be accomplished in this way. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 2, Peter 5, verse 2, Peter says to the elders, "Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof," notice, "not by constraint, but willingly." I think that's an important expression. The New American Standard Version says, "Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, not for sordid gain, but with eagerness." And so all of those kinds of expressions would indicate that a man certainly should have a desire in regards to these matters. Those who are forced to do a job that they don't want will not do it well. But on the other side of the coin, I think right here I might mention, on the other side of the coin, I have known, maybe you have known, some men over the years who wanted the office of elder so badly that they almost went out and promoted themselves like a politician would. That's not necessary either, right? There's an appropriate desire. And if a man is qualified, it should become obvious to others that he is, and he won't have to do any campaigning for the position. The man is to be blameless. Let's look at the texts again. Notice, a bishop then must be blameless, 1 Timothy 3 says. In Titus chapter 1, "Ordain elders in every city as I had appointed thee, if any be blameless." And so clearly that qualification is stated in both texts. The New American Standard Version uses the expression "above reproach." Now be careful here, because when you read blameless here, someone might wrongly assume that means sinlessly perfect. But we know that first of all, that wouldn't even be possible, right? There was only one sinlessly perfect person in all the history of mankind, the man Christ Jesus. But we might point out Peter. In 1 Peter 5, verse 1, Peter said that he was an elder. But we know that Peter wasn't sinless. And so blameless here cannot mean sinlessly perfect, but it suggests the idea of a man who would live an exemplary life. He's not under suspicion. So you hear about this guy, and someone maybe is passing a bad report about this guy to you. How would you react if you heard this bad report about the guy? Would your reaction be, "Well, I'm not surprised to hear it. That does not shock me. I'm not surprised that he would do something like that"? Well, that guy's blameless, right? That guy is not above reproach. On the other hand, you hear someone's trying to pass a bad report about this guy, and you say, "Well, I don't believe that for a minute. I know that guy. That's not him. That's not what he's like." And so he is blameless in that sense, above reproach. He sets a good example. Of course, that's a principle that should apply to all of us. All Christians should be blameless in that way. Certainly, it must be true of a man who would be an elder. Now, he is to be the husband of one wife. Now, again, link this back up here to this argument we were making earlier about a man. Obviously, it's a man, because the man is to be the husband of one wife. 1 Timothy 3, notice, he is the husband of one wife. In Titus chapter 1, again, the same expression, the husband of one wife. Now, there's really an important verb here in both of these texts, and it's this simple verb, be. The verb be is a present tense verb, right? This doesn't say he must have been the husband of one wife, or he must in the future have a wife. That's not right, is it? This is talking about right here, right now, he must be the husband of one wife. The expression in the Greek is literally he's a one-woman man, or he's one woman's husband. So what would you draw from that? Well, he must be married. He can't be a bachelor, right? He certainly can't be a bachelor. He's married. He's a married man. Oh boy, should you even have to say he should be married to a woman, right? He's in our day and time when crazily our society says you could be married to someone of the same sex. That's ridiculous, right? We know he's married to a woman. But notice he's the husband of one wife. This is not a big issue in our time, but it might have been in other places and times. He's not a polygamist. He can't have more than one. He's got to have one, but he can't have more than one. All right, here's a question. Now this has to do with maybe somebody who's already been appointed as an elder, or maybe someone being considered, but he's a widower. He was married. He was married for a long time to the same woman, but she's now died. Could he be appointed to as an elder now? His wife has died. No. He has to be the husband of one wife. A widower couldn't be appointed. By the way, I think this goes to the question, what would you do if an elder's wife died? He's been serving as an elder. He's been qualified in serving as an elder, but his wife dies. Well, again, this is a present tense requirement. He must be the husband of one wife. If his wife is dead and he's not the husband of one wife anymore, he's not qualified anymore. He has to presently be the husband of one wife. Question arises, and it is commonly asked, what about a divorced man? Here's a man who is divorced, but all understand and agree without question that he is scripturally divorced and remarried. Is he the husband of one wife? I would argue yes. Now, if someone says, well, that's not an ideal situation. Of course, divorce is never an ideal situation. We understand that. But the fact of the matter is, concerning this qualification, he is currently the husband of one wife. He's scripturally married to one woman. And so I would argue, now there may be other considerations to take into account, but in regards to this qualification, he's married to one woman, right? He doesn't have two wives. A lot more could be said about that, but I think that's pretty clear, not too hard to establish. He rules well his own family. 1 Timothy 3. And I'm not going to read the expressions we've already talked about, but I'm just highlighting the ones we're discussing now. One that ruleth well his own house. That's an important consideration. And it goes on to add some commentary about that qualification. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? We're going to talk about children here in just a minute, about the man's children. But what about a man whose family affairs are in complete disarray? Here's a man, and we might consider him to be an elder. He has expressed a desire to be an elder. But we know his family situation, and his family situation is just a train wreck. I mean, his relationship with his wife is not good. His children are rowdy and disobedient. And I mean, it's just a really sad situation. He does not rule his own house well. And the text goes on to say, if he can't rule his own house, how is he going to take care of the church of God? That seems to be just sort of common sense. If he can't manage his own business, why would we want him to be in charge of managing the business of God's family? So I think that one is pretty straightforward as well. All right. A man, he desires the office. He's blameless. That is, he's above reproach. He sets a good example. He's the husband of one wife. He rules his own family well. He must have faithful children. All right, now this is a question that is very often discussed. It's one that draws a lot of attention. One of the reasons being because it's actually something I can see in a man. Maybe it's a little harder, for instance, to see blameless. Blameless is important, but that's a little harder to put my finger on blameless. but I can put my finger on his children. And so we, and I don't even know that it's fair to do it, but we pay more attention to these kind of things because it's more tangible. It's easier to recognize. All right, let's look at the text. Titus 1:6, blameless, the husband and wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. 1 Timothy 3, he rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. All right, again, I want to draw your attention to the verb tense here. Having faithful children. He must, at this time, have faithful children. You cannot say, well, his children were faithful in times past. Now, they're not now. No, he has to have faithful children right now. That's a present tense verb, right? And so it wouldn't be applicable to say, well, he did. His children were faithful for a while. Not so much now, but they were. Well, no. If he doesn't presently have faithful children, then he's not qualified. He's got some children, and they haven't come to age yet. I think he will. I think his children will be faithful when they reach the age of accountability. No. He must now, at this point in time, have faithful children. The question, let me go back a minute. The question, let's deal with the how many question real quickly. He must have faithful children. Now, obviously, the word children is a plural word. And so there are some who want to know, would a person who has just one child qualify? Or does he have to have more than one child? I think the easy answer to that question is to ask someone who has just one child. Here's Rick Harris back here. And if I ask Rick the question, Rick, do you have children? Rick would answer that question in the affirmative. You know, sometimes when you're filling out forms, that question will be there. And you have to, do you have children? Rick would answer that question, yes. He has one child, but his answer to the question is yes. That's how we use language, okay? And I think it's easy to prove that the Bible uses language that same way. For instance, in Genesis chapter 21, verse 5, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him, and Sarah said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. Notice Sarah used the word. How many children did Sarah have anyway? She had one, right? She had Isaac. And so you see there that in the Bible, the use of terminology is exactly the same as ours. Here's another argument along that line. Jesus referenced the law of Moses when the Sadducees came to him. Remember, they quoted, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. So this is when the Sadducees were challenging Jesus. Now, what did that refer to? Well, that referred to Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and so on it goes. Do you notice how this terminology is used synonymously, interchangeably? And what that proves, I think, is that in the Bible, that question is answered the same way we would answer it. A man with one child, do you have children? Yes, he has children. So, back to our text, I think clearly, I just can't imagine that it could be argued effectively a man with one child qualifies as having children. I just think there is no doubt about that. Here's the hard part maybe. Faithful, the question of faithful, what does that mean? That they must be faithful. I've heard people say that just means that they're obedient and submissive to their earthly father. I think that that is absolutely wrong. The New American Standard Version here actually says, having children who believe. Now notice how that's used in the Scripture. In Acts chapter 2, verse 41, they that gladly received his word were baptized. And this is talking about baptized people. The same day there were added to them about 3,000 souls. And all that believed were together and had all things common. You see how the word believe there is used interchangeably with those who had been baptized. They were Christians. They were obedient Christians. In 1 Timothy 5, verse 16, if a man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them. Let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Here it's very clear that the expression one who believes is talking about a Christian. So back to our text, faithful children. This means children who are Christians. That's what that means. And so the man who is going to be an elder has to be a man who has children who are Christians. What did I just say? Yeah, I think I said that right. He must be a man who has believing children. One would qualify. All right, here's the big question. What about a man who has children, and so in this case it would have to be a man who had a plurality of children, right? Because we're going to talk about a situation where here's a man who has children, but one of them, or more I suppose, but we'll just talk about one, the case of a man who has one child who has become unfaithful. Not a faithful child. You couldn't say that this child is faithful. But ask the question, does he still have faithful children? Yeah, the answer has to be yes. So there's a guy, he had 4 kids. And all of them came up to obey the gospel. All were faithful Christians. But at some point later in life, one of his children became unfaithful. Ask the question, does he have faithful children? The answer to that question has to be yes, right? Yes, he has faithful children. Now, one of his children is unfaithful, but he has faithful children, right? One of the things that we got to be careful about doing is adding a word in here that's not in the text. Having all faithful children. Does the text say that? Does the text say that all of his children must be faithful? It doesn't say that, does it? Now, what would be your preference? What would be anybody's preference? Well, we want this for all of our kids anyway. We want all our kids to become Christians, and we want them to be faithful all their life long, right? That's what we want. That's what we desire. That's our goal. Doesn't always work out that way. What if a man has a child who has become unfaithful, but he still has other children who are faithful? I think you got to take the terminology at face value. I believe that he would still meet this qualification. Now, there's a little more said here. Titus says, not accused of riot or unruly, having his children in subjection. Timothy says, having his children in subjection with all gravity. Now, that may be another consideration. You know, and so maybe the question we ask is not does he have faithful children, because he does. He has faithful children. But as the fact that this child who's become unfaithful, does it indicate that he was not the father he should have been in such times? His children, he didn't have his children in subjection with all gravity. He was not ruling his own house well. Maybe so. In my judgment, you would have to take this on a per-case basis. Was the guy just a horrible father, and his child became unfaithful because he just did an absolutely miserable job? He did not have his children in subjection with all gravity. While he was the authority figure in the home, they were riotous and unruly. It might disqualify him. Even though he's got some other kids who are faithful now, if we could determine in a case that the unfaithfulness of his children are due to the fact that he's been a pretty bad manager of his own family and he didn't have his children in subjection with all gravity, it might be a disqualifier. But I don't think that we can say this expression by itself, having faithful children, I don't think that we could use that on its own at face value to say if a man has multiple children and one of them has become unfaithful, he therefore is disqualified. I don't think the words can be used to say that. I hope I'm clear on that. And I know that there are some who will have a different feeling about that. I'm just explaining it the best I know how. I don't think it's an automatic disqualifier if a man has a child who has become unfaithful. I think it could be. And you're going to have to judge that on a per case basis. I believe that's the best we can do with that. He's to be a man who is vigilant. Vigilant means watchful. This would sort of remind you of what the Apostle Paul told the Ephesians elders to watch, to be on guard. They're watching. An elder is to be able to watch for spiritual dangers. Notice, vigilant is one of the qualifications here. So if you're going to be vigilant and watch for spiritual dangers, you're going to have to be able to recognize what they are, right? So this would clearly imply that the man would have to be knowledgeable. He'd have to know his business. He'd have to know the Word of God. He'd have to be able to recognize spiritual dangers when they showed up, right? He is to be vigilant. He is to be temperate. The word temperate means self-disciplined or self-controlled. Titus 1 says here, uses the word temperate concerning the qualifications of elders. Obviously, elders are going to watch for the rest of us, right? But they have to be in control of themselves as well. Because I'm going to tell you, I don't want a guy who's over me. I'm supposed to submit to him. He's watching for me. I'm to be submissive to him. But he's asking me to do things that he's not doing himself. Now, that doesn't work in any realm, does it? And it certainly won't work in the church. You know, that was the problem in Matthew 23. Jesus condemned the hypocritical Pharisees for demanding others do what they wouldn't do themselves. That's just total hypocrisy. So he's got to be temperate. He's got to be in self-control. He's got to be sober. Now here the word sober means to be, again, in control of a sound mind and judgment. Notice in Timothy 3, the word sober is used. It's also used in Titus 1, the word sober. This is a fellow who knows, can be serious, who knows when to be serious. He is of sound mind and judgment. I knew a guy once who wanted to be an elder real bad. But the guy couldn't be serious about any serious matter. He was constantly joking and cutting up, even inappropriately so. I would judge that he wasn't sober-minded. He wasn't careful and in control. An elder is to be of good behavior. In 1 Timothy 3, it uses the expression good behavior. I think all of us understand the notion that actions speak louder than words. We're to be of good behavior. If we're not of good behavior, people are not going to listen to what we have to say. That applies to all of us as Christians. Certainly would apply to the leadership of God's people. An elder must be of good behavior. And then we're going to hit one more tonight, and we'll try to cover the rest next week. An elder is to be of good report by those who are without. I think this is really an interesting qualification as stated. I think it goes real closely with the previous one. The previous qualification was of good behavior, and such being the case that he would also be of good report, even to those who are without. I think this clearly refers to those who are not even in the church, those who are not members of the Lord's body. What kind of example do we set before outsiders? He must, notice must, he must have a good report of them which are without. Think about the impact on the church if an elder were known to be evil and corrupt. I knew of a church once where one of the elders had a used car lot in the small town where the church was located. But he had a reputation of being a really dirty dealer in his car dealership. I mean, he treated people horribly. He was underhanded and crooked in his business dealing, but he was an elder in the church. How do you think that would work? It doesn't work very well, does it? He must have a good report of them which are without. All right, there's a lot more qualifications to go. Boy, you begin to get the idea. There's a lot to be considered here. There are a lot of qualifications. So we're going to see if these men are qualified to be elders. We got 3 things to think about. No, we got a bunch of things to think about. All are important and necessary as we consider the qualifications of men to be elders. We've got a very small crowd tonight because of weather considerations, but I hope that others who are not able to be here are able to watch on the live stream, or at least to access this information at a later time online. Hopefully it'll be posted online in our College View live stream YouTube channel. We hope it's helpful. It's certainly a thing that's serious. It's a thing that demands our prayers and close attention. And I hope that we are giving it that at this present time. Thanks for listening. We're going to sing a song of invitation. If you need our help in any way making your life right with God, let us know while we sing this song.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing bath? Are you washed in the blood of